Hi there, and thank you for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. We feature those who are in the process of overcoming or have overcome any type of life encounter, life obstacle that at the time seemed to be almost insurmountable. With this podcast, we have three objectives in mind. Our first objective is we want you to know with a confident resolve you are not alone. We want to work with you. We want you to know there are others who are working with you, who want to help you through whatever you are encountering, and together we will get through whatever you're experiencing.
Our second objective is there are multiple options for any life encounter you are facing. We want to help you develop a resolve that there are various options and solutions to any life dilemma.
Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you're encountering something that was possibly a decision you made sometime in the past, and if you had the opportunity for a life redo, you would make a different decision. We want to help you with those critical thinking skills that can help you make an informed decision and not encounter what you're going through at the moment. We are the Cooper Culture, a veteran-owned business. We work with business personnel and families to develop and sustain connected relationship cultures within their families and organizations. That type organization is one where people feel wanted, appreciated, and genuinely a part of that organization. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty, who is helping me facilitate this podcast. Today we feature Pat Wetzel, a former sailplane pilot, who discusses with us some of the travails, some of the challenges she has had as a sailplane pilot, but perhaps more important are the bumps in the roads that she has experienced, and she has written a book entitled Bumps in the Road. It's a matter of dealing with, overcoming, and getting beyond those bumps that become obstacles in our life, and exactly how we deal with those bumps and move on and deal with life. Marty, what are some takeaways our listeners can gain from Pat?
Pat was a fun podcast because from the divorce from her husband, how she picked herself up and became this pilot. She became what she thought she couldn't do. It was a uplifting podcast, fun podcast, and her personality just came through.
And she's got some great testimonies, a life story. Let's listen and learn together. Pat, great to have you with us. I really appreciate everything that you represent, your book, Bump in the Road. Yes, almost all of us are or have experienced a bump in the road, rock, mountain, whatever term we call it. But it is a matter of tenacity, and I believe a lot of it's a mindset, Pat, of going through and overcoming that bump in the road. Pat, good to have you with us.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here.
Pat, can you run our listeners through and then you may have a lifetime, pretty much a book of events, but is there a common thread through overcoming bumps in the road with you?
With me, it's been quite a learning curve, I would say. I think part of it is curiosity. I think curiosity is one of the factors that really drives me. The other one, I found out I took an interesting character assessment test through an organization called viacharacter.org. And what it does is it looks into all your positive traits. There are no negative traits. Some traits are just more positive than others. And one of my traits was beauty and excellence. And that really, when I read that, it blew me away. It defines so much of my life. Beauty, obviously, I see beauty in nature, in the outdoors, in the air. And excellence, I think that ties into my sense of curiosity in that I'm always driving to try to figure things out, to understand. I take in an enormous amount of information, and I tend to connect the dots in unusual ways, which has led to an unusual life path.
You and I may have a lot in common, Pat. I will tell you, I am what you may consider a transformed curious person. It's not nothing about me, but I will tell you that in an earlier life, I was led to believe, I churned in my mind, I'm dumb and stupid. I'm not going to ask a question in class because you'll know I'm stupid by asking the question. I am now a self-described incurably curious kind of person where I'm always wondering, well, how did that happen? So I'm learning from people like you, Pat. I'm curious. How did various things happen? Have you always been curious throughout your life?
I think so. I think early on it took maybe more of an academic bent in that I was an avid reader as a kid. I was the kid who would ride her bicycle down to the library, take out 6 books, go home with them, read them all before the due date, and start the cycle again. So I think that, that access to reading was one thing that sparked my curiosity. And I think the other thing is my family traveled a great deal. We would spend a few months a year out of the country. So as a child, I knew my way around Paris better than New York. I spent summers in the south of France. My uncle was in the Navy and he was stationed there. So that was a jumping point into Italy and Greece and other places. So I think that being exposed to a lot of different things really gave me a broader view of the world and made me curious.
And so, have you been an avid book reader all of your life? Was that just kind of a natural talent you were born with, a desire?
Absolutely.
Okay. And some of us were not born that way. We became that way. Was it through your book learning that you learned? I'm going to use just one characteristic, tenacity, overcoming bumps in the road. There are some people who are overcome by bumps in the road. I'm not going to, and I don't have to, anything like that. I'm guessing those kind of things maybe never occurred to you, or at least you were able to work your way through that.
It's interesting. I don't know that the books led me to overcome a bump in the road. I think some sports did, but I want to focus on the books because there's one book I read as a child that has been really instrumental in the way I view the world. It's an old science fiction book by Arthur C. Clarke called The City and the Stars. And the reason I identify with that book is there's a society where everybody comes out of the computer. And the mix of people in the society may change over time, so it's not totally stagnant. But the founders of this society decided that they would throw a little wrench in the works every now and then. And this wrench was what they called a unique, somebody who'd never been born before. So he didn't share all the common fears of his society. And this unique was called Alvin, and Alvin went on to change the world. I love that book because I so identified with Alvin. He's a little bit of an outsider. He follows a different path, and his path led him to just incredible adventures. So I would say that book was influential in terms of looking at bumps in the road. I just love that book. But I think the other one probably is sports. I was never great at sports. I was one of those people who was very coordinated and worked really hard. So I could get the number 2 or 3 spot, but I would never get number 1. And I think that that hard work that goes into trying to get a ranking in a sport really was influential in my life. And I think that it later came into play, certainly with flying, which was not a slam dunk by any stretch of the imagination. And it really spilled into many avenues of my life.
Pat, I'm discerning from what you're saying that you are a self-described, you use the word outsider. Some of us may think of an outlier, so to speak. You were, all right, can I use the term just a little bit different, but yet in a very positive way is what I'm determining. Did you feel like an outsider? Were you treated like an outsider during part of your life?
Oh, in high school, I think I was a terrible outsider. I was smart. I did really well. I missed beginning or end of school or Christmas or something due to my family's travels. So I didn't fit in. At the time, that was very uncomfortable. But now I look back at it and I'm just grateful for the experiences I've had.
What you just said is very important because there's a lot of application to the term, I'm not sure where I fit in. And I will tell you that being former military, I know there are a lot of military people right now who are transitioning from military into civilian life who feel just that way. I loved military, says that person, but fitting in, knowing where I fit in civilian life is an aspect of an adjustment. But Pat, when you had feelings of I'm not sure where I fit in, how long did it take you to overcome that? I'm sensing you're a very confident person now, whereas maybe earlier in life you were not as confident then as you are now.
Absolutely true. And I still don't fit in, and I love it. And I would tell anybody, don't fit in. Go within. Find what your strengths are. Find what your passions are. Find what your truth is and live that. That is a far better life than trying to fit in.
I love what you're saying. I have recently learned an expression, find those and be with those who celebrate you and not just tolerate you. And by celebrate, I don't mean that they place you on a pedestal or anything like that, but it's something to the effect you share the same values, the same thoughts, you get along well with each other. And when you're with those kind of people, you just know that I'm with my kind of people. Does that you may express it in a different way, but is that something how you feel?
Absolutely. Find the people you resonate with. And I think that you'll resonate with different people in different walks of your life, and that's okay too. But those really soulful resonators, if you will, are the people you want to surround yourself with. And you may not have a lot of them. They may not live in the same town as you. It doesn't matter. Those are the people that feed your soul, and you feed theirs too, for as long as that lasts. It may or may not last forever, and that's okay too, because people evolve.
I'm reflecting on your book title, Bump in the Road, that I'm envisioning you are the type person I will overcome any bump in the road. And it may be a part in of your life, Pat, where you surrounded yourself with similar minded people, whether you call it persistence, resilience, whatever it is, you're going to surround yourself with those kind of people. My guess is nobody is going to keep Pat down. Did you eventually, over a period of time, just surround yourself with those type people?
I'll say yes and no, and yes and no to being kept down. I think most of us go through periods where, quite honestly, we're not sure we're going to get up again. And they're very difficult. And when you're in the middle of it, you do not know which end is up. You have no idea what's going on, and you cannot see the other side of this darkness, if you will. And the key is to put energy into your situation. Just put one step into your situation. And one step becomes two, and two becomes three. And you might go off on a bizarre tangent, and it's okay. It's the movement that counts, because eventually you'll find your path, but you have to put energy into it. That is the single most important piece, because if you don't, you'll find yourself mired in what I call the muck. And one of my guests, Eric Weinmayer, tells a story. This is his story, not mine, but I tell it often because it resonates with people. He divides the world into three groups of people. Now, these groups are fluid. We all move between all of them. There are quitters who are self-evident. There are campers who want the status quo no matter what. They will resist change. And in all fairness to campers, they may just be beaten down by life, and they're just not going to take another hit. And then there are climbers, who are relatively few people. I think I would wish for everybody to be a climber, because once you've experienced that, you will never stay stuck as a camper again.
That is very well said. The exhilaration of having overcome together is a very operative term for Marty and me. And Pat, I'm guessing together would be the group of people with whom you choose to surround yourself. Can you describe to us some of the bumps in the road that you have written about, some of those quote stories that you have overcome? Because I know our listeners are going to be very inspired by your life stories.
I have 15 people profiled in my book, and I tell a few of my stories too, so people can get to know me and kind of relate to how I relate to my guests and why I relate to my guests. But they're all, and everybody is fantastic. Everybody's just wonderful. But Effie Parks' story always sticks with me. She's a mom and she's pregnant, ready to have the perfect pregnancy, the perfect child. He's going to be an astronaut, all the dreams that go with that. And she had a child with a very severe genetic abnormalities, and it just crashed her world, as you can imagine. And as her friends' children were moving on developmentally, her child was not. And it was just a brutal situation. She was so isolated. She was so sad. She was asking, did I do something wrong? And her story is really about love. When she changed her perspective on the situation she was in, and she found great love and acceptance, everything in her world changed. And I still get choked up telling that story. It's such a profound story because I think the lens we use to view the world is critical. And we have to learn to shift our lens to look at the world from different perspectives, because in doing that, we realize they're all only stories. What do you choose? Everybody in the book is amazing. I have 2 near-death experience stories that I find fascinating. One is from Mary Neal, who is a spinal surgeon. She headed the spine service at USC, I believe, moved up to Jackson Hole with her husband, opened a private practice. They were kayaking down in Chile on the Fue River. And there was a drop of about 10 feet or so, which is totally within her ability range to handle. But she went over this particular waterfall and got trapped underneath, died. A series of unbelievable, remarkable coincidences came together to pull her out of the jungle and get her to medical care. She spent a year trying to disprove her experience because she's a linear scientist. If she can't touch it and define it, it doesn't exist. Well, after a year of exploring this, she came to realize, no, this experience I had was very real. And she says that it moved her from hope to trust. I think that's such a profound change in perspective. I think her story is so powerful. But all the stories are in the book are powerful. They all address issues like identity, desire, obviously bumps in the road. They're all about really turning within to reflect, find your truest path for that point in time, and having the courage to pursue it. How long do I have to tell stories? Tom Cronin is one of my favorites. He was a bond trader. He lived that wild kind of life, sex, drugs, rock and roll, that kind of thing. And he was the biggest partier among all the traders on the floor, until one day it just emotionally, mentally fell apart for him. And he found himself in a mental hospital. And he started meditating. And that changed everything for him. He went back to work as a bond trader for another 15 or 20 years. But he changed the way he did business. Instead of taking people out drinking into strip clubs, he started taking his clients on surfing safaris and to the opera and things like that. And he went on to do a terrific film and to write a book. And his goal is to get 1 billion people to meditate. So all the stories have, I think, so many pieces of truth and wisdom in them. And I think that's why I'm so attracted to stories, is that so often we can't see our own story until we hear somebody else's. But in hearing somebody else's story, we see our own travails, we see our own issues. And if we're wise enough to pause and reflect on that, we can learn a great deal.
You're right on target. I like the one story you mentioned about the person who, through life, learned to have hope and trust, and the lens through which you view life. But what about your life, Pat? You are a parasailer, paraglider, or another way of saying it, you're a non-powered aviationist.
Sailplanes.
You still are. Did that all come about just kind of you want to do it, it happened, or did you have to overcome some obstacles to get to what you wanted to be?
Do you think women in aviation in the 80s had to overcome a few obstacles?
Oh, okay. Oh, now you're talking about aviation being a man's world. You've conquered that.
Well, no, what happened was actually I was going through just a horrific divorce, and I just didn't know which end was up. Everything in my world had fallen apart. And I went to visit a few people across the country. And when I was in San Francisco, I rented a white Mustang convertible and I went driving up through wine country. Now, this is back in late 80s, late 80s. So wine country wasn't the alcoholic adult Disneyland it is now. It actually had a little bit more charm and curiosity to it. I found myself up in Calistoga and I stayed for the night. In the morning, I'm walking the main street, and intersecting the main street at the end of town is an airport. An airstrip goes right into the main road. And I thought, well, that's kind of curious. And I went over and they had glider rides. And I thought, what the heck? I'll give it a go. I went for a ride. It wasn't a big deal. I came back, I landed, I went back to the East Coast. Back on the East Coast, I heard about free lawyers that flew gliders on weekends. So I invited myself out over a 3-day weekend, flew for 3 straight days, and I was totally hooked. My instructor was a World War II naval aviator. And I remember I learned to fly in a 2-seat Blanik where I would sit in front, he would sit in back. And I can remember thinking if I heard him snoring, I was doing well.
Did you hear him snoring?
I did catch him napping more than once. One day, though, I was flying. I was trying to just slow down as much as I could in the thermal to gain, to be efficient in terms of gaining altitude. And I stalled the plane, I stalled the wing, and we went into a spin. And I'm there watching the ground go around and around. It was really beautiful. It's really pretty cool. And also I realized, no, we have to correct this. So I corrected the situation almost intuitively, came out of it. Sam's laughing in the back. And he said, we should do some spin training. So we did some spin training and it was so much fun. It was just great. I am very grateful to him. He taught me to fly really by the seat of my pants, by looking outside the cockpit, by visual orientation. I knew how to fly anything I got into within reason as a result of that type of training. And that type of training is not what everybody gets.
That's just great. One difference in our aviation is as long as I have the fuel, I can get to wherever I want to go. With you, you've got to either stay within sight of a runway or know you've got enough altitude to make it to where you want to go.
Actually, you have to have enough faith and trust that you will navigate a course because you will fly way beyond any place you can land. You will find yourself in situations where sometimes it's not too terrific. It really is a matter of developing the skill, the weather skills, the perspective, and having the guts to do it.
Have you ever been in a situation where I'm not sure where I am, I'm not sure I can make it back?
Oh my God, yeah. When I moved from the original airport where I flew with Sam to another larger club, which I called the Club of Sky Gods. These were the guys that, went to the worlds and they flew really hot planes and what the heck, I'm going to fly with these guys. So I have my new hot plane, which is a story. Getting the plane was a story unto itself. I have my plane. It's gorgeous. I'm out flying. And it was one of those days where the radio reception was just perfect from like Southern New England to South Carolina. And everyone knows I'm the only woman flying a 20. And I announce on the radio, like an idiot, that I am lost. Now, you have to understand, this is Pennsylvania. Everything's green on green on green. There's no GPS yet. And I have no clue where I am. So eventually I find my way. I get back to the airport. I land. And one of the guys had taken the back. There's a big fin on the back of a sailplane trailer. And he had painted it with Whiskey Alpha India for Where Am I? It took me a long time to live that down.
Do you still fly?
No, I don't. I sold my plane a number of years ago. I think my risk parameters were changing. Hanging out hundreds of miles from nothing in the middle of nowhere, wondering if you're spending the night on a dry lake bed, if you're lucky enough to find one, was getting a little bit old. And that can be expensive too. I know one guy who did land on a dry lake bed that wasn't that dry, who sucked his plane right in. he had to get a helicopter to retrieve him. There was no way to get the plane out. So, I mean, lots of good stories. So grateful for the lessons from flying. It is an amazing spiritual sport, ultimately, I think. But it was time for me to move on to some other things.
Talk to our listeners, Pat, about confidence, your, let's say, growth into confidence. You entered a man's world, so to speak, in aviation. My guess is you've overcome and you're a self-acknowledged, you weren't sure exactly where you fit, how to fit, and so forth. But did you always have a degree of confidence that I will and no one will stop me? Or is that something you had to develop through life?
I think confidence comes from competence, and competence comes from hard work. Learning to fly can be pretty ugly. I mean, there are moments when it is not gorgeous. I think I'm just really persevering. I work really hard at things. I try to be better. And I think as you do that again and again in your life, you gain confidence, and you gain the confidence that you can do it in anything because you've established a methodology that allows you to succeed.
Talk to us, if you don't mind. It could be a little bit sensitive, I don't know, about your divorce. And I'm asking you in the confines of hope, for one. Maybe there's any aspect of I'll never be with a man again or anything like that. How did you overcome the any stigma attached to divorce?
Oh, it was just beyond brutal. I lost everything that comprised my life. My in-laws, whom I loved dearly, said if my ex wasn't happy, it had to be my fault. I would just moved to a relatively new community. I knew nobody practically. It was just a very difficult situation. And I refer to that period of my life as life wish, death wish. My life on the ground was horrible. It was just awful. I don't even need to go into the details. You can imagine. But at the same time, I had started to learn to fly. So my life in the air was like, wow, this is really cool. So I had one foot in each camp. And the trick was getting my foot unstuck out of that earthly camp of turmoil and deceit and everything else that went with it, and realizing that there was a bigger, greater world. And it took me a long time to do that.
Now, curious, in hindsight, how long did it take you to overcome the divorce, regain any confidence you may have lost, and so forth? And what I'm really referring to is a journey of overcoming. How long did that process take, would you guess?
Oh, at least a decade.
Oh, my goodness.
I'm not proud to say that, but it's reality. So many things happened that turned my world upside down that made me question everything I had experienced. I had to find my truth in the situation. My truth was that I loved my ex-husband and I loved my in-laws. And if they didn't love me, that was their truth, but it wasn't mine. And I had to reconcile that. And I had to reconcile the abject rejection that came with it all. So it took me quite a long time. And at the time, a lot of people didn't get counseling or anything like that. And I really used flying to expand my world. I moved to a high performance flying club where people, competed in regional contests and, competed for the world team. I moved out west to Minden, which is one of the best places in the world to soar. So I really used that as an avenue, I think, to accelerate my movement in life. And ideally, that should come from within, but I wasn't ready to do that yet. And flying provided me a vehicle.
Pat, I'm sensing you have been on a journey of overcoming rejection, life rejection, marriage rejection, or maybe other aspects of rejection in your life, but you have experienced that and you're on the journey to recovering from rejection. Am I hearing or discerning you correctly?
Oh, I think that's a very good insight. And I think it's true. But I think that you remove yourself from those, or you grow through those experiences when you start learning to turn within. The answer isn't outside. It isn't what anybody else says or thinks. You have to be true to yourself. And if you're true to yourself, whatever happens, you're okay with it.
What you just said is extremely important, Pat. Know who you are, be confident in whom you are, your talents, your strengths, and you use that to move in a direction. And when you discern who you are, you're confident in who you are, you can overcome any rejection, you can move forward. Is there anything I just said that does not accurately portray your life?
Oh, I think that's very true, but I think it's a life journey. I don't think most of us appear there at 30 or even 40. I think that it's a mindset of what can I learn? As events come at you at life, ask yourself, what can I learn? And what can I learn as a person? What can I learn as a soul? And I think that those are the lessons that help us evolve.
I think, there are probably some listeners that are at that first step. So explain to us what that first step would be.
Trust that it will work out, and energy. Put one step in front of the other, no matter how hard it is, and it will be really hard. You will not want to do this. Everything will weigh you down thinking, I can't do it, but you can. And just start putting that one foot forward and things will start to change.
Good, thank you.
Pat, that would be a very important topic to take on in another episode. It's unfair to ask you while we're recording, but I know there are a lot of listeners who feel some aspect of rejection. They want to isolate and they're uncertain whether they can move beyond where they are. Would you be willing to come back and join us and explain your journey of just how we can move beyond rejection and gain the energy to move on?
Absolutely.
I just think I know factually, there are a lot of people, and statistics say we could be in the millions, who lack hope to move beyond wherever we are in life to overcome. And I think you have a lot to offer our listeners, that there's nothing too great. There's no bump in the road that's too large, that together we can't overcome. And said in a more positive way, together we will overcome. And it's a matter of having the right mindset, as you mentioned earlier. Pat, I think that would be a topic our listeners can learn a lot from you. How about if we look toward a second episode where we focus on just that part of life?
You've got it. Lots of stories to tell, both from me and my guests. And I think a lot of my guests have an enormous amount of wisdom in their stories.
And you're exactly right. And we know your guests. We know people have a lot of wisdom in their stories. They have experienced life, and people want to know just how they have made it through life. Pat, we look forward to continuing this episode and your life journey with us. We look forward to another episode. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
We appreciate having the opportunity to share our and our guests' life's experiences with you.
The Cooper Culture advances organizations to achieve and sustain high retention rates, connected communication, and trust through personality insights and principled leadership. You can contact us at our website, thecooperculture.com, and you can contact us directly at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, Marty, at thecooperculture.com. We work with you to help assess aspects of your culture to advance the environment and people to their best performance. We do that through our staff of certified personal performance coaches, leadership trainers, keynote speakers, and DISC personality behavior experts. You can book a speaking engagement directly through our website by contacting us at ron@thecooperculture.com. We look forward to sharing our life experiences with you, some of which are profound, some of which are pretty funny. Some of those life experiences are ones we'll never do that again because we've been through stuff. We truly look forward to working with you, speaking with you, helping advance you in any way that we can.